This one is from a familiar face, RGT85. LOL, this is amazing. I had some interaction with him over the Amico stuff. The initial trailer was super interesting. Earthworm Jim 4 tickled my nostalgia. But I could tell after that and the lack of product something was off. He also asked me for my address to send me a shirt in the early days, which I did. And he said he dated a girl from this town when he was younger. Did he lie about that? Son of a bitch. So it looks like in the earlier days, Tommy was targeting the larger influencer crowd, like RGT85. I guess that's why he got John Riggs and Metal Jesus a little bit at the very beginning, so... it's unfortunate for Tommy he had to settle for the small channels like DJC and Mike Mullis or Retro Bro. The Piano Slave 1 says, I remember going to the video game live concert in Pittsburgh when I was in high school with a friend. It was really enjoyable and there was an opportunity to meet with some of the main performers after the concert, Tommy included. This being in the early 2000s, and my friend and I being huge Kingdom Hearts fans, we excitedly told him how much we enjoyed the concert. He asked what our favorite parts were, and when we told him it was the Kingdom Hearts section, he gave us such an annoyed, condescending expression that I still remember it to this day. Hearing what a narcissist he is, I wonder if he was just unhappy we didn't like the part where he came out to do a guitar solo, or couldn't take any credit for it. Well, most likely that is the case. He is definitely bitter and jealous of others. The Israeli ranter says, I remember seeing G4 in some of the shows that included Tommy back when I was a kid. My two distinct memories of him was at the house tour where the British guy hated his house.
This is absolutely hideous. This is not real.
What? No, it is. It's all real.
This is not... Are you sure?
The second one was when he and Victor reviewed a voice control game called Lifeline, and Tommy kept giving voice commands to the main female character to take off her clothes. What a role model he sure was. And yeah, just more examples of how this guy, not the face you want to have for a family-friendly console. Sarzian says, fantastic video. You unlocked a memory I had repressed about Tommy Tallarico. In November 2008, I worked promo and merch at a video games live show when it came to my city in the UK as part of a culture event. I was not paid for handing out flyers nor for selling the merch, instead being volunteered through my college. I didn't get to watch any of the show as I was instructed to wait until it ended in case someone loved the show so much that they'd leave to come buy merch in the foyer. So at the end, when someone asked Tommy's brother on my behalf if I could get like a commemorative t-shirt as compensation for my work, he looked at me like he was mentally calculating how much my time and effort was worth to him. As he made it very clear we didn't sell nearly enough merch to make the show a worthwhile venture, presumably also factoring in that I looked like the sort who would blast them online. How right he was. Anyways, I still have the shirt. That experience forever changed my perception of how many unsung, uncredited, unpaid individuals the greats used to hoist them up, and I've always strived to give credit to everyone involved in a project as a result. So there you go. So this looks like they also used volunteers to sell the merch. That's pretty lame. Tiny Toil says, at this point I'm honestly convinced that Joey is the actual owner of the house and he just lets Tommy live in it out of pity. That's funny. A random user says, I noticed how Tommy suddenly gets a case of itchy on the back of his head or face. That also seems to happen when he speaks of his titanic labor on Metroid. And yeah, it's just like when I did my first video showing all the different tells of Tommy telling lies. He does really make it obvious when he lies by scratching his face or using the words Mike Sully 110 says, strange, he lists Unreal 1's mission pack Return to Napali, yet the music for the expansion was made by the same two composers who did the original, Alexander and Michel. 2 or 3 tracks in the original Unreal were done by others. Necros did the Scarge bass track, but I couldn't find Tommy's name or his company in any of the UMX files for Unreal. Okay, he's listed under sound effects, but the only sounds added to Return to Napali were common stock sound effects. Most of them are stock sound effects heard many times before, such as the spinner spider enemy squeals, which leaves the weapon sounds. But that would account for under 5 seconds of actual sound. Does he count 5 seconds of sound in this record? Plus, why would Epic Games go to the hassle of consulting just for 3 weapon sounds? And I bet you a lot of games fall under this too, where a company just bought the generic sound CDs and used 1 or 2 effects, and Tommy likes to credit himself as being part of the game. And I find that to be very, Very lame. A random user says, I went to a Video Games Live concert years ago. It was a good show, but they didn't tell us what they'd be playing, which led to some bad feelings. If you see a band, you can generally assume they'll be playing their own catalog. If you see a normal symphony, you'll know exactly what classical pieces they're playing. I didn't recognize a lot of the video game soundtracks they played, which was a bit disappointing, but they were still cool. The biggest problem was the ads and posters had Triforces on them, and my group was mostly looking forward to the Zelda music, and they didn't play any. And it wasn't just us. When they announced the show was ending, the whole crowd started chanting, Zelda, Zelda. The orchestra was packing away their instruments, and a singer came out and led us in an unaccompanied, still alive from Portal. It is a bittersweet memory because the sing-along was a fun idea, but if they felt they were trying to make us shut up about Zelda, such an absurd situation. At the time, I was a kid. I was disappointed and confused, but not really able to express myself. But now looking back as an adult, that was straight up false advertising. Anyway, I don't know who put the Triforces on the ads, but left Koji Kondo out of the program. But I've been low-key pissed off at them for years. If it connects to Tommy, then that's pretty rich. LOL. Well, probably wouldn't be pissed for years about that. It seems kind of odd that the person would be still holding a grudge, but that is kind of bait and switch that they're promising, because a lot of people want to hear Zelda because that's one of the greatest soundtracks for any series of games. So if they have it on the advertisements, they really should be playing it. Bangulo says, I contacted Tommy back in 2004 on MySpace asking him about the track Wreck of the Conception. Now he has re-uploaded it titled Shipwrecked from the game Treasure of the Deep, and I was always a huge fan of the beautiful nylon guitar on it. So I was asking him what they used to record the track and what kind of guitar he used, etc. At the time, the game was about 6 years old. But one thing that always struck with me is how he didn't remember much about the recording process for the track, like not even what DAW he used or any detail about the guitar, which is the main instrument in that track. I was excited at the time to even get a reply back, but now after watching this video, I'm even questioning how much music did he also even write. I am now thinking the guitar on there and maybe that track completely is not even his, since he was so vague about it. I remember doing a MySpace blog about it, and I have screenshots somewhere, but unfortunately the Wayback Machine didn't save anything of my MySpace profile from back then. So there you go, we had someone asking about information about the tunes, and you would think a guy like Tommy, who's so narcissistic and has such an ego, that if anyone actually wanted to know more about anything he wrote musically, that he would be all up in it. So if he currently has all the time in the world to, or he did last year, talking to 14-year-old kids and every single person on YouTube about his Intellivision Amico, you think he would give this guy some answers about questions on the musical track he created himself. So I'm guessing someone else wrote the track. Bruner writes, I do believe it's pronounced wave. That's a good one, especially after my last video where he says a lot. Rabbit Ears CH says, after watching this whole rabbit hole of lies, appropriate with that username there, I remember something that I found strange. For over a decade I've heard the name Tommy Tallarico thrown around as a famous composer, but it's been very different from the way the other video game composers get talked about. You talk about Tim Fullen, someone links you Pictionary. You talk about Grant Kirkhope, and you get something magical from DKC or something silly from Banjo. You talk about Dean Evans, and you get the hauntingly beautiful song he slapped onto a Flintstones game to pad the sound test. Tommy never seems to be associated with a song or work like that when he's discussed, and I generally think it's because there's so much fluff that nobody's ever checked. It's a good point. Some strange-looking fella named Movie Madness Entertainment says, I'm the guy dressed as a serial killer in the vid. Oof, great job. Wonder if he got upset with all those remarks on him. Death Metal Indian says he's the Frank Dux of video games. If you're not, or is it Dukes, sorry. If you're not familiar with Frank Dukes, look up, was it Bloodsport or Kickboxer? And he's the Tommy Tallarico of the martial arts scene. It's absolutely hilarious. He may be worse than Steven Seagal. Maybe he's not quite as bad as Seagal, but they are very similar. This one was posted like hundreds of times. Fun fact, in Brazilian Portuguese, Tallarico is a slang for someone that steals their friends' romantic partners. Even his name means something untrustworthy. And that was brought up a lot. That comment, and also about how his pot light was dangling from the ceiling. I think I saw like 100 people wrote about that. Trey Hill says, Tommy's the guy at the party who wants to impress you with how cool he is, but he didn't bother to get his story straight. Every time he hesitates and says, he's definitely constructing a lie. And we've proven that over and over again. The story about Tommy reminds me, and this is from Saux. The story about Tommy reminds me of the time I caught a 2-meter fish. I was fishing out on the lake, and my Ferrari, when out of nowhere, a 10-meter fish bites the line I totally designed. Then, after I hauled this 3-ton fish out of the lake, I continued to work closely with him for 5 years on Metroid Prime. I currently hold the Guinness record for longest deep-sea fishing expedition in gaming. That guy is hilarious. That was awesome. Manatees and mermaids. Oh, don't talk about mermaids around Tommy. Can you imagine how proud Tommy's mom must be of Joey Kuras? That's so funny. Username Pat the NES Punk says, I'm very interested in learning about this Tommy Tallarico, a person I have never heard of before and who definitely have never personally attacked me before in any way. The next one is from Hey It's Sherry 175. I just can't believe that New York Yankees minor league Hall of Famer Tommy Tallarico would lie to us like this. That's another funny story that the Bomber Guy completely did not cover but should be covered. Tommy pretending he's a professional baseball player and a Hall of Famer. That's hilarious. Gatorooz Inc. says, even 2 hours couldn't fit in all of Tommy's lies. For example, claiming, in an investment document no less, to be a Yankees Hall of Fame baseball player. Not making that up, but he was. It was a fantasy baseball camp where you get Hall of Fame awards if you attend 5 times at a cost of $5,000 per time. Stag from TOS says, imagine being the sound designer for Earthworm Jim and saying, hey man, I really love all your Mario stuff, to Shigeru Miyamoto. It'd be like an undergrad physicist saying, hey man, I really love all your relativity stuff to Albert Einstein. I'm even now doubting whether Shigsy really created Mario. Is anything real these days? And that's a good point. As if you would address Miyamoto, I really like all your Mario stuff. That's hilarious. And this one is from East Coast Italian. Legal incoming. Looks like I can add another name to my hater folder. Congrats! I will say how absolutely wrong you were in the whole video. I just talked to my good friend Miyamoto Shiggy this morning and he was very upset at how you depicted me in this video. Gaming racist. Like you are what's wrong with the gaming community these days. And you should be ashamed of yourself and all the 78,000 haters who like this video. I'm an East Coast Italian. It's just part of my personality. But if you did actual research on me, then you would know that. And that was from East Coast Italian. That face looks familiar. Mady says, MF Doom wannabe motherfucker is the funniest thing. And Sith of Darkness says, Italians.wave. That's good. Humphrey Spelling Bee 1732 says, the fact that Tommy, a gentleman who made an adult decision to make his house look like it was designed by a 12-year-old boy playing Sims with every expansion pack, is weirdly embarrassed that he holds the world record for the most video game concerts performed is somehow both the most and least surprising part of this video. ArtTurbite2681 says, as someone who has made a bunch of sounds for little game jams here and there, I can assure you there is no way in hell you spend half an hour on something like the oof sound. You record a human voice, slap a pitch shifter, plug in, and maybe do some EQ and compression. That's it. This guy is such a fraud. And that's what I had said earlier with the Scott Baird comment. Vampirilius749 says, dude, I'm so mad this is the man who owns Intellivision now. And I have a lot of fond memories of playing Intellivision games with my dad because those were the games he was nostalgic for. And he wanted to show them to me. I love those games. And they're going to go down in flames because Tommy needs his ego boost. Depressing. And yet that's another good point. There's not many, but there is some Intellivision, like the old school fans. And if I were a fan of them, I would be also disappointed that knowing that moving forward that a good chance that Intellivision will never ever be shown ever again and there'll be nothing of it. So he ruined the legacy instead of, in his mind, conquering Atari and making it Intellivision reborn again. So that is kind of sad and depressing. Paper Bago 17 says, Tommy probably doesn't even own his own house. It's all a prop. And it's a funny thing they should mention that because on the subreddit, I won't post it here, someone has shown that Tommy has remortgaged his house a few times, which is a bit odd considering like the price that was listed wasn't that high. And you'd think for being a rock star and having all that money, he'd be able to pay off the house You know, especially since it contained all those expensive stuff like the Spider-Man comics. But Minecraft Miner says, someone should ask Tommy if he worked on Sea of Thieves. Secular Sam says, this guy desperately needs a psychiatrist. He's also deleting comments off his MTV Cribs YouTube video. And I read somewhere else that he has been deleting comments on YouTube as much as like a lot of different videos. So if you do have anything that is eye-opening, make sure to get a screen grab or something, because he's going around trying to erase all the stupid things he's written. And I know it'll be impossible because he's done it so much, but very interesting. So he is aware. Boodle in a Can says, what? EP was Tommy's show? Growing up, I didn't know who he was or even cared about him. I still don't care about him. But I always saw him as the guy that had a complexion. Like he wanted to be bigger than he was. Sure, he had a pretty cool energy and all, but his co-host was the professional one who knew his stuff. Tommy is more of the edgy enjoyer one. Zanith Zarda, who I've seen posted quite a bit, said, not Tommy's show, he was just a callous, unlikable bag of pugs. It was Vic's show. And I want to bring this up again because he credits himself frequently about being the co-founder of Electric Playground. And Victor Lucas has told the story a few times. He originally created the webpage, and then he created the show and needed someone with, you know, an insider into the business to help him with the show and to also expand the show down to California because they wanted to expand to the States. So Tommy was like, I know he helped them with the show, and then in the credits there's like Joey Curas and a bunch of other people. So he was definitely involved with the show, but he was only part of the show for the first few years, and the show went on for about 20 years, I think. And at its peak, it was definitely not him and Tommy. It was him with like Scott Jones or someone else. So yet another thing that he yes, he was a part of the show, but he didn't create it, is what I'm saying. Don Davis says, I've seen Video Games Live 3 times, and at one show he mentioned composing for Sonic. I don't remember if he claimed to be the first American to work on Sonic. Probably not, because I'm in Canada and Canadians don't care about American machismo. And someone in the audience went, woo. And Tommy said, it wasn't any of the good ones. This moment of self-effacement has been on my mind after watching this video. Curious about where that Tommy is. And he's done it a few times. And that's weird. With Sonic, he said in a couple interviews that, it's not one of the good ones. Which is weird because he's worked on a ton of like shit games. So I don't know why he wouldn't be proud of it. But he also did it with MDK. He made it seem like, oh yeah, MDK wasn't that good. And both those games, as far as we know, the music that he provided was created by someone else. So maybe there's a story there. Who knows? Reach 7020 says, as someone who currently works in the game voiceover, I can say for almost certain that Tommy's recollection of the recording and editing process for the oof sound is comically suspect at best. While I can't speak for every studio and or engineer, I can assure that it's extremely unlikely that anyone, Tommy or Joey, would remember a single detail about a throwaway grunt sound 20 years ago. This is, once again goes to my point with Scott Baird. I've edited thousands of lines of voiceover, and I wouldn't be able to recall lines of dialogue I worked on a week ago, let alone decades ago, not unless it was unique or significant somehow. And the sad part is that most audio engineers know this. Tommy doesn't have to lie to a group he is already a untrustworthy authority in, but his compulsiveness just won't let him stop. And that's what I said before. And the last line is pretty good thing to bring up about him being his compulsiveness of just lying. He can't help himself, and that's just his personality. Puxerby says, I've seen Video Games Live, and I remember my friends and I looked at each other when the concert finished and said something along the lines, wow, the orchestra did a great job, but that host was kind of a douche. This is so surreal because I've never given this dude a single moment of thought, and now you've made a nearly 2-hour-long expose on him. It's hilarious. So yet another person not a fan of his antics. Computer Weekend says, when I was on AOL, 1998-ish, I was 13, Tommy IM'd me. It's funny because that's old lingo, IM'd in AOL. Anyways, Tommy IM'd me directly after I had sent him an email gushing about how much I loved Wild 9. I asked him some questions about getting into the game audio and what kind of game Messiah was. it was on the back of the Wild 9 box, and his answers were pretty generic. But I was so excited to be talking to him, so I didn't care. When I told him Wex was my favorite character, the entire conversation switched to how he was the inspiration of the character's looks, and they used his voice, and I did this, and I did that. While I didn't raise any red flags at the time, I'm now 100% sure that I was actually talking to him. He was self-aggrandizing and egotistical at the time. I figured he'd earned it. Everyone else did, I guess. So that's another funny story of him gushing when someone shows that they're interested. So does he look like the Wex character? You be the judge. M. Scotty90 says, I find it strangely hilarious how he hasn't hung any of those Guinness records up on his wall. He's so proud of them and just has them sitting on the floor. That was weird. You think out of everything he cherishes that he'd put those front and center in his house? And he has so much stuff on his walls. Like when you watch the whole house tour, he has tons of pictures and artwork from Disney. You think he'd have somewhere to put his Guinness records. Pumpkin Mary AM says, this commie guy's voice sounds almost exactly like Butch Hartman's voice. And they even have similar personalities, LMFAO. And I had no idea who Butch Hartman is until after reading all these comments. I saw probably 100 comments talking about Butch Hartman. And I have to say, they do look quite similar. It looked like they could be relatives. And for the brief YouTube clips I saw, he was really, not sure if the word is egotistical, but he really pumped himself up. And what's really funny is that in this clip, I'll play a little bit of it, he even talks like Tommy, saying, you know, so many times.
Like, when I was growing up, I loved Happy Days. I loved, I loved, I even like going back to the 70s, I loved Taxi, and I loved, Cheers. And
so good.
Yeah, exactly. And
Rhubarb Encrusted, I like that name. I've got a little story relating to this video. Indulge me. I went to a gig last Sunday, UK Subs in Bradford. They were ace. And on my way back, me and my brother popped into the pub for a pint of Guinness. We got our drinks and sat down. We're chatting away normally, but I can't help overhear what the other two people in the room are chatting about over a pint each. They hadn't said anything that specific, but I was adamant I knew what they were talking about. I go up to them and say, sorry to interrupt, but are you talking about Tommy Tallarico? We proceeded to discuss this video for about half an hour at close to midnight in an empty pub before I had to go and walk my dog. It's strange how things like this happen. Well, at least Tommy's name is getting out there, not in the positive way, but a lot of people are talking about him these days. Mistman1210 says, just want to throw it out there that the current president of the Game Audio Network Guild is Brian Schmidt, and he is legit. He got a start on pinball and worked on the infamous Black Knight 2000 soundtrack, along with Dan Forden and Steve Ritchie, a detail he always mentions when he talks about it. Crazy, right? And worked on audio tech for the Xbox. He later started Game Sound Con, which has gotten pretty big. All this to say, gang is probably pretty cool these days with Tommy gone. And it would be interesting if someone were to do a full video about the gang network. Because from what I've read, Tommy hasn't been involved at all since 10 plus years. And I'm wondering if he was ousted or how his tenure there worked. So, would be interesting, hint hint, for someone to do. Luna Ray Dew says, I sang in a video games live concert once. They scouted people from my high school chorus and a local church choir. The performance was unpaid, but it was a fun experience. I met Tommy Tallarico without knowing who he was until now, except a guy who worked on a lot of games, and asked him for advice on getting into video games VA. He just kind of looked at me weird and gave some half-baked answers that essentially amounted to, I don't know, which honestly was fair. So there we go, another example of Video Games Live getting free help from students, and I really surprised. I didn't realize after all these years that they would have to go to get free help and take advantage of young people who just want exposure or experience. Kind of sad. So that's all I have for the comment section of the hbomberguy video. There's so many of them, 22,000 plus the last time I checked. Maybe I'll make a follow-up video in a month or two, because most of the comments now are just people piling on Tommy and making fun of him. So there's not too many more news stories that are popping up in the comment section. But I will say, though, I skimmed almost all those comments, and I think I only saw maybe 5 people who defended Tommy, if that. So it's 99% of the people going against him. So that probably isn't going to make him feel too good, knowing that pretty much there's more than 5 haters nowadays. So I will say, though, I do have one more video that I'm going to make, because since starting the series of reading out the comments from that video, a few more news stories have developed, or else criticisms of the comments that I read out or what I've said in the past. So there will be one more bonus episode with a couple of the most, I would say, egregious things that I've read to date about Tommy since what has happened. So stay tuned to that. So until then, I'll see you in the next one.